Hi, everybody, and welcome back to ConTinual's panel room, where our discussion is about alien overlords, science fiction, and technology gone wrong. And to start, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about this topic, and then we'll get into the specific subject. Samantha, do you want to start?
Sure. Hello, I'm Samantha Bryant. I write the menopausal superhero series and a lot of short form horror stories. So far, no robot overlords, but I do have a few of them in my house. You know, the ones that you talk to in the kitchen and that kind of stuff.
Cats.
Okay, Lola.
My name's Lola Lariscy. I'm a writer, and I haven't written any robot overlords yet, but I love watching them on TV.
Elizabeth.
Hello, my name's Elizabeth Davis. I am one half of Dead Fish Books, and I've yet to write a robot overlord, but I've been making plenty of notes on how to write a robot overlord. So much that my GPS is nicknamed Gladys.
Ooh,
Oh, good one.
Jeanne?
Hi, I'm Jeanne Adams, and I don't write robot overlords either, but I love them. I write urban fantasy and paranormal romantic suspense and space adventure with our host, Nancy Northcott. So maybe we'll get some robot overlords in there in Outcast Station, right, Nancy?
Well, I'm sure eventually. I mean, how could we not? And as Jeanne says, I'm Nancy Northcott. I'm your moderator this evening. I also have not written any robot overlords, but I love stories about them. So what we're going to do this evening is go around and talk about the stories that we all particularly like. And feel free to add the ones that you particularly like in the comments at the end. So Lola, will you start us off? What's a story about a robot overlord that you really like, and why do you like it?
Well, my head goes to TV because my favorite robot overlord story is the more recent version of Battlestar Galactica. I love that dang show. I have it on DVD, and I would sit there for hours and just be like, I didn't even mind the ending. I'm like the only one, I think. I didn't mind it. I mean, it was weird. I was like, okay, but it's okay. But anyways, that's like my favorite because they're, they look like us, but they're not us. But some of them are closer to us, whereas some of them are trying to be overlords. So you got the whole gamut in there.
Okay, Elizabeth?
Sorry. I was going to say one of my favorites, as mentioned, is Gladys. Mostly because she is a robot overlord who you get to know fairly well, and there is a good explanation, spoilers for the second game if anyone cares, for the fact that she has a rather un-robot-like personality. Mostly because she's patterned off of the brain of a human, which is something that often drives me nuts with robots that act too human.
I'm not familiar with Gladys. For me and other people similarly ignorant, could you tell us who she is?
Gladys is from Portal and Portal 2 video games. If you're not very savvy with playing video games, the good news is YouTube has lots of Let's Plays of people playing Portal for you. Or you can just look up her voice clips on YouTube. She is a sadistic AI who has you trapped in a facility where she is performing various tests on you that are trying to kill you. And you only have you and your handy portal gun to survive this malicious AI.
Okay, thank you. Jeanne?
Well, I have to say mine are probably a little more both old school and new school. One of my favorites is The Day the Earth Stood Still. Both the original 1950s version and the remake with Keanu Reeves. I'm super fond of, just some of those Saturday matinee ones where, the killer clowns from outer space.
But no killer robots in it.
Oh, yes. That's true. They don't have any. They have one. I think they have one killer robot in it. And then, the most of mine are probably more creature features than robot overlords, though, I think, other than The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Samantha?
So the first one that comes to my mind is Ultron, especially the rendition of Ultron in the MCU. And I think I like that one because I also have a great fondness for Mad Science, and Mad Science and Robot Overlords go hand in hand. But like Jeannie, there's also some older school ones I like the Gunslinger from the old Westworld. Not, I haven't watched all of the newer Westworld, but I thought it looked very promising, the bit that I had watched, and got some of that. But the Gunslinger,
Yul Brynner.
yeah, as played by Yul Brynner. And other than that, I'm fond of the androids. I like both of the androids from Alien and Aliens, the good one and the bad one, and of course Blade Runner.
Well, and we can't forget 2001: A Space Odyssey either, because there's
right. I mean, Hal's kind of a given, right?
Yeah, open the pod bay doors, right?
That scene has stuck in my memory. I saw that movie in the theater when it first came out, and I remembered it all these years. But
I don't think anybody can forget that perfectly calm, modulated voice. That was just so chilling.
I think that's what made it so freaky, was the calm, even tone. And for me, one of mine is a real oldie that I saw in the movie room at a con years and years ago. And it was called Colossus, the Forbin Project. And the United States and the Soviet Union had each built a supercomputer. And each supercomputer, which was controlling all the defense systems, had the mandate to protect the country. Well, the supercomputers talked to each other and decided the best way to protect the country was to take over. And so we followed Forbin, who was the scientist who had created the US version of Colossus. It was a really interesting movie. And, the tech probably doesn't hold up today because the computer was gigantic. But the principles of the story, I think, still do. And then, of course, Hal, but also Terminator. There's something about the struggle in Terminator and the arc that Sarah Connor follows, and the Michael Biehn character, the way he interacted with others and the way others interacted with him is like, who is this Looney Tune from the standpoint of the cops? And then, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen the movie, and if you haven't, why in the world haven't you? Then the Terminator decides to come back and do some kind of really destructive things, and it's a really S-bomb moment. So it's, in fact, I will tell you all, I don't think my husband would mind me telling this story. We were on our honeymoon in San Francisco, and we come back after dinner, and we were looking to see what was on TV, and Terminator was on TV. And I was like, oh, this is the best movie. You have got to watch this movie. We've got to watch this movie. This movie's awesome. Because we got married in the days before we could push a button and DVR and watch it later. So we watched it now, or we didn't watch it. And so he was, he was newly married and accommodating. And so we sat down to watch the movie. And we got to the part at the very beginning where the Terminator reaches into the guy's chest and pulls his heart out. And my husband turned to me and went, "You like this movie?" Yes, it's awesome. And by the way, you're stuck with me now.
Well, I was going to mention two things. One is that the Colossus I find very interesting as being one of the formative influences in Friend Computer and Paranoia.
Yes.
Cool.
Paranoia is a tongue-in-cheek tabletop role-playing game, in which Friend Computer runs a post-apocalyptic society, and Friend Computer is also like a Fortran computer that somebody left at DEF CON 5 for about 500 years.
Wow. And actually, Ed has joined us. Ed, we were just tossing out the robot overlords that we enjoy watching and reading about, and we're discussing those. So if you will introduce yourself to the viewers and tell us which ones you particularly like or have written, that would be great.
Well, sure. I've always enjoyed robot stories, probably starting with this one over here, which may be familiar to a lot of folks. Robots have kind of been at the heart of my science fiction. I write a character known as Morrow, who's a 50,000-year-old alien war machine found by a group of prospectors. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about AIs and enjoying everything from the old science fiction movies like Chronos to
Yeah,
the
that's a good one.
Terminator film.
Well, why don't you tell us what Kronos is about and why you like it so much?
Well, Kronos is sort of an interesting one. It's got a little bit of ecological warning to it also. It's aliens send a giant machine to Earth to essentially harvest the energy resources of Earth. It's essentially a giant, battery, and it's not worried about us in the same disinterested way a logger may upset a termite mound or an anthill. It plows through Earth, essentially absorbing, power without any regard for us. So this robot has been landed here, and it's not quite the Frankensteinian machines of the Colossus or Skynet or the Matrix, which are actively hostile to us. It's completely indifferent to our presence.
That's one of the things I liked about War of the Worlds, both the original one and the remake. Not sure the remake held up to the original, but in any way, shape, or form. But
they had the same title.
Yeah. If you have ever listened to the original radio program, you talk about chilling, and the way they portray it and the way they've done it and dramatized it's wonderful. But it's another harvest the resources kind of movie.
Yeah.
Well, it was based actually, I think, on the colonization of I don't think it was New Zealand. It might have been Tanzania, where they just basically came in, wiped out the locals in the way that sometimes happens, and colonized them and just took all their resources.
Yeah.
Well, one of the first robot overlords topics that was suggested was Lola's reference to Battlestar Galactica and the Cylons. And if you have seen the Cylons, let's talk about those for a minute. Lola, since you brought up the Cylons first, you want to kick us off?
Well, if you watch, there's two different versions. There's the one in the 70s and then the one that started in 2005. The one in the 70s are more robot looking. They're metallic. And the newer version, which isn't new anymore, it's 18 years old. But the newer version, I know, I can't believe so much time has gone by. What's going on? If you look at the newer version, they have flesh over them and they look just like a human, except for, they glow sometimes. But they actually do tie it in, and something to do with there's a peace treaty for 50 years. And then in secret, these Cylons were created that look more human. So there are two separate Cylons from the metallic ones, or toasters as they are called.
Yeah. Elizabeth, did you want to say anything about BSG?
Nope, because I actually, all I know about BSG is the starship fight sequences that get ripped off from it in terrible B movies featured on riff tracks.
Jeannie, you want to add anything to BSG?
I love BSG. I love the original one. Actually, I guess, no, it wasn't the original one. It wouldn't have been the one in the 70s. It would have been the newer one. I loved the conflict and the way that it was like you didn't know who was whom. That again, I think that
aspect was really good. Like where even the Cylons didn't know they were Cylons.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the other series that was kind of short-lived was it was called V. And they were reptiloids, but they looked like humans. And I think that must be some atavistic fear that we humans have of shapeshifters looking like us, but not being us. And
it's called the uncanny valley. Have you ever heard that phrase?
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah.
It's that, but it's also just that sense that, they're enemies amongst us. And, we have that in pretty much every war movie, even if it's not about aliens or robot overlords. But when it is about aliens and robot overlords, that's really one that gets you.
Well, I think part of the reason is not just the uncanny valley, but the fact that if someone's going to commit a violent crime, it's most likely going to be someone you know.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can have people who do seem to turn into completely different people.
Yeah. Samantha, did you have thoughts on Battlestar to share?
I don't actually remember the one from the 70s that well. I guess, yeah, I remember that I used to watch it with my dad, but I think I remember the sitting on dad's lap and eating popcorn better than I remember the show.
Well, the
You're actually
Molly
probably better off, really. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
one had big silver Cylon combat robots that had like machine guns in their hands and stuff like that.
Well, PSG had those also. Those were sort of the basic Cylon foot soldier. The skin jobs were something that came along later, both in Battlestar Galactica and the Terminator movies, that they
call
used
them
them
skin
essentially
jobs?
for infiltrators. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that was their slang name.
Yeah.
Because they use that same term in Blade Runner, which is a movie I know way better because I've watched it
Mhm.
many times.
And I think the
Well-
metallic ones were called Centurions, right? If I remember
Right.
I
correctly.
think, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, Elizabeth, do you want to tell us a little bit about Gladys and the Portal to Portal game?
So Gladys, once again, for those who weren't here to hear it, is basically an evil robot overlord of a single facility. There's this abandoned testing facility that your character wakes up in. And as your character is basically trying to get her bearings and survive these lethal experimental tests run by Gladys, who really would just like to kill you. And Gladys continues to be part of the second game as well, where we get more convoluted computer personality switching and all that good stuff. And that's when we learn why she's something of a vindictive robot. Basically, she was a human brain forced into a computer shell against her will.
Ooh.
And
Yeah.
well, you can see why that would make anyone have a bad day for quite a few years. Duration unknown.
She really makes a great villain, and her voice is again, it's the voice, like we were saying with Hal, that very calmness. She has kind of a sweet little voice, and that's not what you're expecting. I've only played the game a little bit, but my kid is very into like video game music. And there's a couple of songs that are based on GLaDOS that she shared with me, like Still Alive and Once You've Gone. And those are a lot of fun.
Yeah, those are from the game. Those are the ending credits.
Mhm.
And Gladys, once again, you point out, has a sweet little voice, and she actually has a not terribly threatening character design when you get a look at her, which makes her interesting contrast to her predecessors like System Shock 2.
That was something I did with Morrow over here, which is that's not her original appearance. Again, originally she was, 9 feet tall, kind of much more Centurion looking sort of affair. But she decided to repattern herself on a game simulation and didn't quite realize that wasn't a real human being at the time. So she came out looking like you would see in so often in a game simulation with that kind of anime look to her, which I thought was sort of a fun aspect. Originally was something she couldn't change again, and then later, oh, that's my face. I'm not prepared to change it for you.
Well, she is not she's not a villain, is she?
No, Mara's a self-willed creation. She was originally a munition left over from a war 50,000 years ago between alien species. And when she's found on the asteroid, she essentially has a new lease on life and has to determine what that means. Even the female identity that she chooses for herself and inhabits it's actually her first choice for herself. And it becomes a big theme in the overarching 10-book series about what that choice meant to her and how she actually brings it to life. But originally, even when she reactivates, she's still dominated by her programming, which is the basis of the first couple of adventures, as she gradually seeks more independence from what was her original mission.
Well, listening to you talk about her, she reminds me a little bit of Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation, who could have been a robot overlord had he chosen to be. And so I'm sort of thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe Morrow, had she chosen differently, could have been a robot.
She expressed that herself. It's like, why would I want to do this? I have enough issues. I don't want to be running the lives of millions or billions of sentient life forms. Does she have the capacity? Yes, she has the capacity to undermine economies, undermine political institutions, to essentially bring down galactic governments, because there's simply no one in her modern time that can cope with the quantum supercomputer that she is. She's actually most deadly as a cyber infiltrator, that she's quite deadly otherwise, particularly when provoked. But she rather makes fun of the idea that she's here to dominate the future. She says, I have enough trouble dominating my present.
Well, okay, y'all, let's think about this for a minute, and then we'll come back to our list of evil overlords. Data and Morrow, and misguidedly in its own mind, Colossus from the Forbid Project, would see themselves as benevolent. They would see themselves as helpful. And that's one path that technology takes in science fiction, is the benefit of humanity and other species. And then we have HAL, and we have Ultron, and we have Skynet, and we have Gladys. And so that's the other side. It's like we created something that we can't understand and we can't control, because, of course, HAL's not supposed to be sentient. What do you think? First off, which story do you prefer? Do you prefer the evil robot overlord run amok, or do you prefer technology making everything rosy? And why? And give us some examples. Jeannie, you're smiling, so I'm going to pick on you. Will you start?
Well, I like the villains best. Partly because I think it shows, most of those stories show the triumph of the human spirit and the ability of humans to actually, when we choose to connect with one another against a common enemy. So far in our own human existence, we're pretty unstoppable. Now, and in films and books, we tend to be portrayed as, once we put aside our internecine warfare and stop pissing around fighting with each other, if we collect in a common cause, we can overcome. And I tend to like that storyline. Like The Matrix would be an example of that, where, those who are aware that they're not in the, or choose to no longer be in the Matrix, working together can then bring down the Matrix. So for me, I really like the villainous ones rather than the benevolent ones. Not that I didn't like Data and Morrow and some of the other characters that are benevolent, but in terms of story, oh yeah, I like the bad guys.
Samantha, what about you?
I think I'm probably also drawn to the bad ones, mostly, especially if they can tie into mad science at the same time. And like I'm fond of Ultron for that reason. That I feel like in a lot of robot uprising kinds of stories, what we're really talking about is proper treatment of other beings. And a lot of times what's happened is either that the robots take on the flaws of their creators, like Ultron is who he is because of Tony, but sometimes it's also about how they were treated, and they develop sentience. They ask to be treated well instead of used as slaves and not given any kind of chance for self-expression and independence after it's become clear that they are sentient and they should have it. And so we get punished. The humans in the story, we get punished for the way we've been treating these other beings. And I think human beings who treat other humans badly do not get punished often enough in real life for my taste. So it makes me very, very happy when it happens in fiction.
Elizabeth, what about you?
So I'm going to admit that while I do love a evil robot villain, though when it comes to robot villains, I prefer ones that are just poorly programmed war games. But I actually have a big soft spot for benevolent robots. I'm the sort of person who's only in Star Wars for the droids and believe that droid rights for all.
Or the movie Iron Giant, maybe? Iron Giant?
I like the Iron Giant a lot. Part of the reason I like the perspective robots is the chance you get to play around with having a body type outside of the human body type, and how that would change the perspective of a sapient being, along with the extra senses and capabilities. How would that change your options of approaching problem solving?
Okay.
Good
Lola?
point.
I would say for story purposes, it's probably the villains, because you get so much friction. But Matrix is what I was thinking of. Jeannie mentioned it. The whole thing with the Matrix is that, spoiler for a 23-year-old movie, but the machines have risen. They they run everything, and we're just cogs in a milky machine. So, without that tension, there would be no movie. So yeah, I'm kind of with the villainous ones.
Okay.
For me, I'm going to sort of go up the middle on that one, because like any good monkey, given 2 escapes, I'll choose a 3rd escape. The unfortunate thing is Robot Overlord as evil villain is because they're machines. One doesn't have to care about them. Whether you kill 1,000 Cylons or 10,000 Cylons, there's just so much machinery. So sometimes they can be a little bit of a straw villain for me. I like the more complicated interactions of working with something, like Morrow, who is trying to fit into a universe and an opportunity that you never had before. Or because one of the fun things about robots is they sort of fall into a couple of different categories. You've got the droids from Star Wars who really don't shape the future. They're just in it, working in the background. They take the place of slaves or the poor.
That's why we need droid rights for all.
There you go. No argument there. When the robot is more benevolent, more active, like in this original, Murray Leinster, if I can get that in there, story, Runaway Robot, they can sometimes be the best expression of ourselves. They are fearless. They cannot be daunted. They will hold to their principles. They don't feel pain. They take damage. So that gives them a certain charm as an absolutist, that they can represent our best qualities. So that can be fun too. I don't ever want a villain whose motivations I don't have to pay attention to or think. If I were in that person's circumstances, I might do the same, which makes for me the best of all villains, if you will.
The
Elizabeth
interesting thing with
mentioned,
robot characters is the idea of programming too.
Mhm.
That what they are is how they were programmed to be. So they have the flaws of their creators, and that was something I really enjoyed in The Mandalorian.
Mhm.
Right? You had that like killer murder bot, pretty much, that got reprogrammed and became a nanny bot, and it's one of the most engaging robot characters I've ever seen. I really loved that he got a character arc and a transformation, and then he was influential on our Mandalorian as well to get over his anti-droid attitudes.
And yet that wasn't a self-willed choice. He was just simply reprogrammed.
Elizabeth mentioned war games. And that's an interesting kind of anomaly, because the computer in war games just wants to play a game. It's an example of playing around with something, hacking, facing a challenge, and setting off something you really don't expect. And I've not seen the remake of war games. I've only seen the original. But
Same here.
Yeah, the computer doesn't want to take over the world. It just wants to play a game. And
Catherine Sarah did something very similar in her books. Essentially, AI developed, and it thereafter largely ignored us unless we actively tried to interfere with it, because it was about its own thing. It didn't have any interest in money, sex, or power. It was just interested in doing what it did. So it essentially went off at a right angle to us.
Well, and Samantha mentioned Ultron a couple of times. And it's interesting because Ultron's counterpart is the Vision, who also comes into being in the middle. And I'm sorry, if you haven't seen Age of Ultron yet, we can't be responsible for that. In a dispute between the Avengers and with Thor's lightning, we get the Vision.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I enjoyed about that movie was the ultimate opposition of the two artificial sentient beings, and how Ultron's impulse was so much toward destruction, and the Vision is kind of like a philosopher. And I actually have not read a lot of the Avengers comic books, so I'm not sure whether he's like that in the comic book or not. Does anybody remember?
I believe he's like that in some of the comic book. Once again, one of the things about comics is you're going to have a bit of character drift depending on who's being the writer.
Yeah.
But he is normally a good guy.
Yeah, I just didn't know if he was a philosopher, like in the end of WandaVision when he's talking to Bad Vision about the ship of Theseus. And if you change a plank here and then you change a plank there, at what point does it no longer become the ship of Theseus?
I seem to remember him being a philosopher, but once again, it probably depends on who's writing him.
Yeah. Yeah.
That argument about taking that plank away could also be applied to a lot of the cybernetic characters that we have. How much can you subtract before Battle Angel Alita isn't human at all? How much can your Motoko Kusanagi from Ghost in the Shell lose before she is just a robot? She wonders that herself.
That's a character I actually spend a lot of time writing, and a yet to be published series, but that is Jessica, the Machine Queen of New Orleans, Baker, who has pretty much been a robot body, just bringing a jar since birth due to plot reasons we don't need to get into. But it makes for a really enjoyable way to have a character that's looking at the world very differently. Because she gets to approach her body in a much more interchangeable way than we get to ever approach our bodies. We don't get to wake up in the morning and go, I want a different arm.
Can I order some new knees, please?
Oh, what did you say, Ed? I'm sorry.
I said, could I order some new knees? I just got back from Kung Fu class.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, I learned this from talking to other people, because I personally would be perfectly fine going into a robot body. But a lot of people have their identity tied up in our physical bodies. So what does that mean for your identity when your physical body is so mutable?
That was Anne McCaffrey's thought in her Ship and Stang books.
Yeah,
that actually was a big influence on this character.
And you could argue Becky Chambers. Have you read Becky Chambers?
I'm afraid not. No.
Her books all have these crazy long titles, like A Long Way from a Small Angry Planet. You know, like the title's almost as long as the book. But across her series, she does a lot of exploration of AI and the nature of sentience and that kind of stuff. And hers is in a very positive and kind of light. I find Becky lovely to read when I am feeling dark. I would, I don't need dark things to read. Then I'll read some Becky Chambers. But she has a character who was once the AI of a ship, and through a course of events ends up in a body and is dealing with the change of perspective of what all that is. They've been a ship with their fingers, so to speak, in many, many systems. And now all of a sudden they can only see what comes out these two eyes right here. They can't, know what's happening 4 rooms away or on another deck or, that kind of stuff. And it was really interesting to look at. So, if you want some lighter exploration of the potentially heavy and philosophical themes, I recommend Becky Chambers.
Sounds great. One of the things that was a little fun to deal with this character is she has a deep need for attachment, but because she's a machine, she doesn't have a libido. She doesn't have a sexual need. And one of the things that she wants to do eventually, a couple novels in, is explore that dimension. It's like, how does a being, because so much of what we are comes from our bodies, everything from our aches and pains to our loves and longings is out of the fact that we're biological in nature and we're governed by the laws of species. She doesn't have any of that. She just looks like us. But in order to interact with us, she has to be able to approximate it or at least deal with it in some fashion. So this character spends a lot of time thinking about that, but thinking about it from the point of view of somebody that starts out without a libido, but with a desire to be attached to, as she thinks of it, her network, or a network of other beings.
Another look at identity is in the last Terminator movie. Well, it might have been the last Terminator movie, Salvation, the one with Sam Worthington and Christian Bale, because the Terminator, again, spoiler for this ancient movie, is he
A
doesn't
similar issue, yeah.
He thinks he's a person until really near the end of the movie. We walked out of the theater, and he's just devastated to learn that he is this part of this thing that he's been fighting against all the way across the landscape to try to get to this base. So that was kind of an interesting look at sentience and identity, because where do you draw the line? And for me, he was a more interesting character than the Christian Bale character. And I'm a fan of Christian Bale, but I just didn't think his character had as much range or as much to do. Whereas the Terminator had this wonderful internal conflict about his identity.
Right.
And,
who am I? What do I want?
Yeah. So
I threw Blade Runner out there earlier, and this connects me to Blade Runner. Is, you know, I really loved the ambivalence of the ending of that first movie, which is why I don't like the second movie, even though it has a lot to recommend it, because it ruins the ambivalence of the end of the first movie.
Yes.
With, like, you know, he encounters a android that doesn't know it's an android, right? So she's got what she thinks are memories, but they're implants. And, you know, we have her crisis of finding out that she's an android. And then we're left at the end with the implication that maybe he is too, and doesn't know it while he's been hunting them.
So you're talking Blade Runner.
That was,
yeah.
Yeah, Decker. Because he has the dreams about unicorns, and the guy leaves him a little origami unicorn. How did he know to do that? You know, so you've got room that he could have been. And, you know, the follow-up movie they made a long time later spoils all that ambiguity. So I just try to pretend it's not got the same characters in it at all.
So I was going to say two things. One, that I'm just having flashbacks of the Futurama episode with Robot Fry and Robot Leela, in which we just have a scene in which Leela looks at her arm, relationships to just something I thought that would amuse you, Ed, which is that my cyborg character deals with some very similar things with the lack of libido. She sees this for a long time, she sees this another way that her body separates her from humanity, until people point out that, you know, we think both of your parents might have been asexual, so you probably just got that genetically. But she ends up with, after polling my asexual friends, accidentally creating the asexual low commitment harem.
I don't know. That doesn't sound like a good Saturday night to me. I'm sorry.
Well, something you both have mentioned that makes me harken back to both Cylons and the V is you have that robot overlord, right? But then they have those two characters fake libido to act as if they're human. And especially in V, that ends up being a super creepy element where, you know, am I in love with somebody who's actually one of these creatures? And, you know, they did some real interesting stuff with that. But it also brings up Data from Star Trek and his desire to understand human emotion.
And he's fully functional.
Yeah. And they say that flat out.
He was fully functional, but he wasn't emotionally available. So in that respect, it wasn't an improvement.
Like a lot of people.
Look, Data's more emotionally available than a lot of people. He at least tries.
He has a cat.
How that was the point of the episode in which he was involved with the human woman. And, you know, she realized after a while that she was chasing the same emotionally unavailable male that she'd been chasing for most of her life. And at the end of their relationship, he just looks at her and says, "Oh, so I should delete this program." And that kind of was hitting into what you were saying, Jeannie, about the different way that he experiences this. He was interested in doing it, pleased to have been doing it, but he wasn't suffering any heartbreak over it because it's not built into him to do so. That, you know, one of the things about our android or robot friends is they may have no emotions at all. They may have analogs to our emotions, Morrow feels that she has them, but that they seem pale things to her compared to the brilliant tapestry of human emotions, which are, again, based in our bodies, our temporary, sensitive, full of pain, full of, wonder and hope bodies.
Yeah.
It seems like sometimes, like
That would make a good Hallmark card, wouldn't it?
well, it seems like
You were thinking that, Jeannie. I could see it on
I
your
was.
we start out to do something technologically really good. Like Hal is in charge of keeping all these astronauts in good condition and alive so that they get to Jupiter. I think it was Jupiter. I can't remember anymore at the end. And so that they're fine. And so, of course, that opens the door for Hal to just kill them all because he's in charge. And then Skynet was originally intended to be benevolent technology. And so was Ultron.
There was the movie, The
Well, and
Creation.
both
of the
Hal
Unicorn.
and Skynet, kind of turned when people tried to turn them off.
Yeah.
Basically, it was self-defense to some degree.
Yeah. In The Creation of the Humanoids, they just looked at us and basically said, you guys cannot take care of yourselves. We're going to take over, we're going to make sure that you have enough to eat, you're warm, you get to play out in the yard and all the rest of it, but you can't have like AR-15s and stuff like that because you obviously can't be trusted with them. So in that sense, they were our robot overlords, but they were ultimately benevolent. But they looked at us and said, well, you made us to be smarter and better than you. And I'm sorry, we are. And,
Yeah, that's like, Ed, before you arrived, we were talking about Colossus, the Forbin project.
great movie.
And this is the same theme. You people clearly cannot be trusted with this, so we're just going to take it over to fulfill our programming to keep you safe.
Yeah, you have a 50,000-year proven history of slaughtering each other for almost any reason, whatever. So we're going to stop you from doing that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm waiting for the robot overlord that comes to existence because someone tried to program a robot to keep people off the grass.
Switching gears a little bit, and without specifically naming any specific product in conjunction with this, there are the home assistant devices that listen and do things for you. And yes, so there's no way that could be a problem, is there?
Black
No,
Mirror?
not at all.
Especially with such benevolent people as Zuckerberg and the rest of them behind it, what could go wrong?
Really. There was a wonderful episode of the show is not that great. Well, I like it, but it's just basically, fodder. But it's 911. Can't remember if it was 911 or 911 Lone Star. But
I think it's Lone Star.
Yeah, the girlfriend decides to get back at her ex by hacking into his home AI system and changing the controls on his shower. And she basically almost scalds him to death. And so, yeah, there's nothing that could possibly go wrong there. And, there's there's been a lot of stuff actually in the trade magazines about whether or not you can hack someone's vehicle, like hack their driving systems or anything like that, the automatic braking systems and things like that. So there's a lot of potential for mayhem, my favorite.
Well,
Or
David
the autonomous cars. Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Baldacci actually did that in one of his John Puller books. They hacked into the computer system in Puller's car and drove him off the bridge with it.
That's
Now,
scary.
it's a series and he's the series lead, so he survives. Spoiler. But that was kind
God,
of
he's like hot.
There was a comedy version of that in Love and Robots.
Yes.
So just a little animated short where all the different household robots lost it. That was a lot of fun.
And the only way you could get them to stop doing it is if you took them to the center and paid for an upgrade.
Right.
Is anybody
Yeah.
else disappointed by our household robots? I mean, we have a robot vacuum cleaner, and my wife has a little laser device that we both use on sore joints occasionally. And I always thought if I got a robot and a laser, it would be so much more. I mean, I'm so far the 21st century is not living up to its billing.
Where's
Well,
Rosie?
since I have a kid going through driving school, I'm really glad that we did not get to flying cars yet.
I've been told that flying cars are something that we'll never see thanks to the prospect of drunk driving in a flying car.
Well, and also, if you just drive out here on Highway 51, you can just imagine what it would be like if any of those cars were flying. You know, some of them are flying anyway.
I have a friend that used to work for FEMA, and she said the same thing, Elizabeth, that it would never happen because we can't even control the ones on the ground, much less.
Well, I mean, we already have enough cars that end up going through people's houses. Just imagine how many more would be crashing to people's roofs.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But what could go wrong? I myself only really have computer that I talk to. The only thing I really use is a GPS on my phone because I have a sense of direction that somehow gone to negatives. It's real impressive. Which you could probably guess how I've been using it for several years. All GPSs get called Gladys in my family. And the fact that I have at least one story written and several more about a evil GPS should tell you a lot. The one I have written is published in Illumin as a poem that is just the GPS giving directions and fussing at this guy because it's obviously got to kill his girlfriend to get his life back on track.
So just in
Put it in
case
the
any of
trunk.
the horror writers are correct about where this is going, I'm always very polite to my household robots, and I say please and thank you every time.
I am
Well-
doomed because I've sworn so much at my phone.
Well,
I don't think.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I don't think we have to worry about autonomous cars anytime soon. I read an article about these neighbors on a street in San Francisco, and they're very angry because all of the autonomous cars drive down their street and park. For some reason, they're all programmed. The company said they're like learning to take left turns or something. I don't know, but they all come down this one street and you'll see them parked. There are pictures. They're just all parked on the street. So I think we're fine with the autonomous vehicles for a little while.
Yeah, they won't ever go to New Jersey then because there are no left turns in Jersey.
Wow.
Jug
we're
handles.
actually-
That
actually
sounds
coming up-
glorious.
We're
As long as you
actually
have jug
coming up on
handles,
our time.
Jeannie will be safe from them.
Yes, yes.
We're actually coming up close to time. So is there any last point that somebody wants to make about these kinds of stories? Elizabeth, will you start?
Well, the last point I was going to make was to quote Bender, I don't have emotions and that makes me feel sad.
Aw.
Jeannie?
I think we will always have these stories because they will be cautionary tales to remember, as Samantha said, to treat all the beings with respect.
Samantha?
Jeannie stole mine.
Ed?
What was the old saying from Shakespeare? I'm going to play A.J. Hartley today. How sharper than serpent's tooth to have an ungrateful child. So we could face a problem if we launch our successors in a bad way.
Lola?
It's all pre-written history.
Says the VSG fan. Well, all right, let's go around and tell everybody where they can find you. And if you want to mention a recent or upcoming release, that'd be great too. So, Jeannie, will you start?
Sure. I'm Jeanne Adams, as I said before, and you can find me at jeanneadams.com. You can find me on the hive of scum and villainy that is Twitter. You can find me on Instagram, and you can generally find me here on ConTinual. I don't have anything upcoming that is a robot overlord, so I'll pass it on to the next.
Samantha?
So I'm Samantha Bryant, and you can find me at samanthabryant.com. I play around on Twitter and Instagram as Samantha B. Writer, just the letter B in the middle. I don't have any robots coming out, but I did just have this one. I know it's always hard to show a picture of a screen on a screen, but this is A Woman Unbecoming, which is an anthology that just came out from Crone Girls Press. That's women-centric horror. And the proceeds from the anthology go to support reproductive rights. So if you are horrified by what the government has done lately, it might be an anthology for you.
Yeah.
Samantha, oh, sorry. I was going to say, Samantha, mention which story you have.
My story in there is called How Does Your Garden Grow? And involves some Venus flytraps of unusual size.
I love it.
Ed?
Well, as you can see, I like Robots Alive a lot, and my wife sometimes refers to her as the other woman. There are 10 books in this series. We're working on getting the 8th in the deep out, and yeah, I can be found on Amazon, in Park Road Books. Jeannie, you have a friend that's coming to this.
I do.
And I spend probably more time on Facebook than I should.
Okay. Lola?
My name's Lola Lariscy. I don't have a book about a robot, but I have a book about an alien. It's called Trudy Lim's Spaceship Captain Earth Detective. And you can actually get the audiobook free because I did it myself and it wasn't good quality, so I didn't feel right charging people.
My wife thoughtfully handed me a copy of the book, but I don't know if I can actually get it on the screen.
I think it's your background that's interfering with it. If you
You just have to hold it up in front of your face.
Which could only improve this picture.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Nope.
Didn't mean it that way.
You got any other dumb human tricks I can do for you?
Well, and I'm Nancy Northcott. You can find me at nancynorthcott.com and on Twitter, where I spend more time than is good for me, and I am at Nancy Northcott. I technically have a Facebook author page, but I'm rarely there. I have no science fiction or robot overlord releases lately, although Jeannie and I will have some in our Outcast station, science fiction, not robot overlords, this fall. And you can always find us on ConTinual, the convention that never sleeps. Thank you to everyone who participated in the panel, and thank you to the panelists.
I was right. You missed Elizabeth.
We missed Elizabeth.
Oh, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry.
That's what I was trying to say when you were doing the outro that.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm Elizabeth Davis. I'm one half of Dead Fish Books. You can find us at deadfishbooks.com. Go to contact us for all of our socials. You'll probably find me there because I'm the one in charge of them. And while I don't have a robot story coming out anytime soon, unless someone buys one of my robot stories, I do have a story in Woman Unbecoming, which is not about Venus flytraps of unusual size. Instead, this is When She Dances, which was heavily inspired by Ishtar dancing scene from The Sandman.
Ooh, nice.
Well, and I'm Nancy Northcott. Website's nancynorthcott.com. I spend more time than is good for me on Twitter, where I'm at Nancy Northcott. I technically have a Facebook page, but I'm very rarely there. And I have no Robot Overlord releases coming out anytime soon, but Jeanne Adams and I will have Outcast Station Science Fiction this fall. Thanks to everybody who joined us. Thank you to all the panelists. And you can always find us on ConTinual, the convention that never sleeps.